The way that we think is very powerful because our world is shaped on what is inside of our head, how we see the world, how we operate through everyday tasks, how we socially interact with other people. And we are living for necessities to get us by. And every day presents a different struggle to overcome. And we are always, as individuals, trying to be the one who is in control. We're trying to gather as much of stockings, belongings, every sort of accessory items for ourselves to fit socially and to make our voices count for something in some way or another. We're always trying to make a better vision for what is ahead. That's what we think in terms of us progressing as individuals. And I'm going to say that one way to really think outside of, what is of the norm, what is of the patterns that we typically all go through, which is you work, you earn, you sleep, and then you awake, and then you repeat, a very similar cycle day by day. And, we as human beings, we want to search for deeper meaning of life. We want to search for things that can't be explained, on a level even of why everything is the way that it is. Why do we have to pay all of these bills in society? Why do we, grow older? Why do we get sick? Why do we suffer, pain on all different levels, all fronts? Why is there selfishness in people rather than cooperation? And why do we have ideals that people believe to make a certain pattern of society, to be controlled or to be submitted under a certain guise of belief structures? And why do we have governments that rule over billions of people? And I could just say the reason that life is the way that it is because of order. And order is what is to control all things, that is to be subjected to what is overall order itself. I'm going to tell you something that is very factual. Millions and millions and millions of people, they cannot govern themselves. They cannot lead themselves by themselves. They have to have someone, or they have to have certain individualists that are leaders, that are a certain group, that is a certain percentage, to set the bar for the rest of the masses to fall in line in a orderly fashion, that there is what I call a specific law and order. You think about it, the reason why we have all the laws placed before us and why there is so many different ways of censorship that exists within the laws that they made, and why there is, only certain individuals that have certain access to certain types of socially of gatherings and belongings, why there are certain classes of people, rich and poor, is because it's to keep people in brackets, to keep people separate from one another, for where one group is more centered outside of being part of what is of the typical norms of individuals that don't fit in with certain groups that are socially, affluent compared to those who are not affluent, those who are acceptable versus not acceptable in class brackets. This is how people are divided. And they create division gaps as a way of control, as a way of keeping order from one type of group of individuals to another. And most people in this country, they are poor compared to being wealthy. Because if you take a look at the 9-to-5 system that most people you see work under, they're working just paycheck to paycheck to survive. Just to eat, you have to work 9 to 5. You don't really have the type of freedom that you think you have when you're living under a 9 to 5 system. Therefore, you're poor because the quality of life, I'm going to say, is poor compared to those who don't have to really do anything except go on their laptop. And if they own a business, they close a few deals, they sell a few merchandises. They could just make phone calls in the comfort of their home. They could be out walking even in the street. They could just pick up their phone and they could tell somebody that is a customer of their business to go and pick up something at X, Y, and Z location. And they don't even have to be in the store working. A business owner that has their own credentials that's carved out for them. They have their own assets. They have their own equity. They have everything that they could just operate at any given place, and they don't have to slave labor. That's a person that works but yet has freedom, that is able to travel at any given point, any given destination, doesn't have to be controlled by a boss over them telling them what to do, scrutinizing every little sort of way of critiquing in the way that they are doing their job. When someone is working for the man, remember that person is subjected to any type of authority, even if it's unjust authority, because there's no fairness when you're working for somebody else. They tolerate you and they give you enough time that they feel that they want you under their belt, doing the work that they want you to do. But I'm speaking in a way that when you think that you're free to do whatever you want, it's not really true. The American dream is basically of you choosing to accept and to adapt, fitting into the criteria of those who are in power, those who have set the bar, those who have set the standard of how you need to work, how you need to consume, how you need to interact socially with groups of people. They give you a narrative on what is acceptable to say, and they give you a behavior that is a controlled behavior that you must go along and you must act in a way that they approve and what they say goes. The reason why most people, and I'm saying this for a legit cause of truth and reason, most people can't lead themselves, most people are followers, is because there is just so much of out of control chaos that is in all different masses, groups of people on the earth, to where you have confusion, you have so many different energies and frequencies that are amongst all different types of people, and all different types of people have their own outlook on how they want to see society in the way that they want it to be. And everyone will not be able to agree and to coexist with so many different perceptions, so many beliefs of what one from another thinks is right and wrong, what is good and evil. And everyone that has different ideas, different outlooks of how they think the world should be run, and because people are all about survival, people would never see eye to eye. They'd be killing each other over resources. They'd be fighting over personal views of perception of themselves. And one person may believe that they should be able to take as much of clothing items out of a store where you see on a shelf, and they should be able to take as much and wear as much that without having to pay a dime. And somebody believes in completely paying for every single item. If two people disagree and there's no one to follow, if everyone is left for their own devices, the person who wants to take everything for free out of a store, such as clothes or groceries, will kill somebody, rob somebody that believes in honestly paying for specific items of buying and consuming. So you'll have people all over the place, and you would be living in like a Wild West scenario where law and order would become something that would be a scarce thing, because everybody would be governing themselves to where there would be basically disorder. And it's because human nature is all about being animalistic in our human nature. And this is just the human equation of how we are in our mental capacity, thinking, in our physical way of being, is that everyone is all about survival for themselves, survival that is of the fittest. And people would be too scared to lead on their own. I'm talking about a vast majority, to where they would be in charge of governing their own communities, to where they had the responsibility as individuals having to work with others in terms of their own opinions becoming ways of making laws and ways of making adjustments to whatever is of a norm of cultural events. They would have to be involved, and they would have to engage. They would have to all assimilate to each other. So the reason why you have certain groups, certain individuals that are a percentage of individuals that are in positions of higher secret power, that pull the strings on all of what I call governing of nations. This country is governed by people who control at the very level of creating every form of, mind technique, submission. That's the one way you control masses and massive amounts of populations, is through social media. Inundating them with all types of political theories, ideologies tied into political structures, political thought. When you watch the news, everything is tied to what is of a political layout, a political narrative, to keep people's minds constantly controlled in what you think and what you observe, in terms of how the media puts every narrative into perspective, into what goes into your mind, on how you feel and how you behave, is all operated through the television, through social networking, through social devices. Even all these different entertainment podcasts, sitcoms, reality TV shows, is all part of programming, is to keep people, for the majority, in a docile state of being consumed with external things, external social communications that are based off of trivial and mundane topics and interactions. You see, the thing is this: all of the schools that teach education, it is docile education for the most part. They give you a little bit of a layout of history about certain events and certain figures, but they don't give you the truth as it is in its purity of truth, because they want to keep people docile for the most part and give them a little bit of critical thinking so that they have reasonable skills to interact, so that not every single person is completely in a state of non-intelligent operations. So they give you the ability to have what I call a very small percentage of intelligence, to be learned and to be acquired in schools, institutions. But it is very narrow. And, your rights that you have as far as freedoms is of variables in terms of what freedom is accepted based upon the projection that is put out by those who are the elitists, that they make the laws. And the people that are under the elitists are the politicians. They are the law enforcement. They are the military. See, every layout of authority is being under the submission to those who are specifically the ones at the very top that are creating, or that have created this system of a monopoly of all types of control that makes a society govern in a order that keeps the system that we are in operating and flowing and perpetuating. You see, I'm going to tell you something that is essentially a part of the human condition, is people are afraid of losing power when they have power in this world. When you have empires that have conquered other nations through imperialism, through all types of techniques of war, and being that which is the protagonist of colonization of nations, of certain particular groups of individuals. Once they have gotten the power and they have won wars, they have set apart other nations, other colonies, in terms of them being the main breadwinner of consumption of land, resources, technology, and innovation. They set the standard then for the rest of the world, because they are the superpower of the world. And when a superpower gets threatened, because those who are from other nations start to rise and they start to become more intelligent of being able to gather what is of, let's say, of an ideology, to bring people in, and they're able to form a coalition to where people are starting to think in a way that would lead to overthrowing a specific nation. I'm saying from another nation, you have people that are in the position of gaining knowledge, gaining power, and gaining that which is growing in the potentiality of superiority. So a nation that is in power already, that has conquered lands, has conquered for resources from other nations, and has set the bar, has set the standard of control, they become where they feel threatened. And so anyone else who is rising that is of another particular nation, or when you see people being influenced by certain groups or certain individual speakers on a world, let's say, economic, political stage, it could be even a spiritual layout, speaking things that are spiritually of enlightenment, of truth, or it could be even just about education of oneself. If someone is in a position where they have a platform because they are someone that is connected to a certain institution of broadcasting ideas and so forth that's tied to what is of the system that we are under, they start telling people how to educate themselves in a way to where they read books and they start doing research. Anyone that starts to bring up critical thinking to individuals' minds, those individuals will start to rise up. And you have this in all countries around the world where you have even leaders that are trying to overthrow with their nations that they are governing, particular nations that have a lot of power, a lot of wealth, a lot of militarization. And we know that it is the will to power that everyone is seeking for. Everyone is trying to assess that which is all of power. And people will fight for power at all costs, and they will do it at the expense of human lives on massive quantity levels or individual levels. I'm going to say this. The reason why political influential figures and even spiritual figures over history have been assassinated, have been taken out by governments and powerful, we could say, secret societies, is because the fact that they were capable of making a change in society to affect the human consciousness and to bring about critical thinking and to be able to empower people massively on a large scale, to where if there was enough information that people in political positions of power that was speaking out against the status quo of the way things have been governed by elites for centuries and particular groups of people that have the keys of this sort of knowledge barrier of control, and also the very enrichment and the very, we could say, how they have enslaved people from all different nations, all different sects, all different factions that they have set up, that have enriched themselves particularly, would be undermined. People would overthrow, what is of the ideological system, the corporate, let's say, controlled system that even creates the very 9-to-5 slave system. People would start to learn ways on how to navigate, how they could make their own profits, how they could develop ways of innovation through coming together and brainstorming how to create their own communities in a way that would be of their own way of critical analysis. I'm going to say, even in just simply working with their hands, people could create their own business flow of, just coming together, and people could put their own resources that they can come and create their own way of business that would actually establish them away from what is of the 9-to-5 controlled corporate entity of society, for an example. And there are just different countless ways how people can do it. If people are educated where they're reading books, and because you have those that are influential speakers on a world stage telling people the way to think for themselves, and if people start coming to the realization of thinking for themselves, people that are in power, the very billionaire, trillionaire, 1%ers, how are they going to keep their massive amount of wealth flowing? How are they going to keep, their positions of power as a stronghold over those that they want to control? They'll start to be overthrown, and I'm not even speaking in a way of physically, of violence or protests. I'm saying people opting out of the system, opting out of what has been created for people's lives. That is not their own lives, but everything is a script as far as what you have been watching on everything that is media, everything that is, commercial, mainstream propaganda, television. It is all to control your mind, to make you think in a world that is not yours, but it is of the world, that is of other people, other groups, idealists. So the thing about freedom is when you take the freedom that you know you have for yourself and living out your complete authenticity that is of wisdom from experiences that you experience in your life, your day-by-day interactions should be based upon, clarity. It should be based upon a vision that you have for your own personal self, not what is passed down by others and their opinions of what a vision of you should look like. You see what I'm saying? And this is the reason why you're always going to see where anyone that rises with the knowledge of trying to get people to critically evaluate anything to do with reasonable truth. Anyone that speaks about anything that is to awake people out of being asleep, is to bring about what is common sense. Anyone that is speaking common sense, that is speaking about God openly, that is speaking about fundamental realization type of principles of life, the value of life, the value of a human soul, and anyone that is speaking against all of the things that we see that is pushed as a narrative, whether it's a race sort of narrative of people that they're trying to get to divide of one against another, if it's a gender divide, they do it through all these political assessments. And any time when you see in politics where someone rises as a political voice and they're trying to spew just common logic, that they're trying to bring what is a common practice of morale to the general consensus, and to speak about everything that is a propaganda to be walked away from, and to opt out of what is propaganda think, let's say, of socialization. You'll have a leader that will rise, and that person is a well-prominent figure in a certain community. What they'll do is somebody who's a higher person that is of an elite government power official person will set up an organization to where you have people that are from all parts of the world that work for this one zeitgeist entity. And it could be from anybody from any nation that could be placed as someone of an assassin to assassinate that person, because that person is potentially dangerous or is considered dangerous to the very power structure that doesn't want anything to change, so that people will end up in a position of educating themselves and opting out of the propaganda society, the Western culture propaganda particularly, that has been revolutionized as complete propaganda of everything that is news media, everything that is biased education, and a deterioration of a nation with unethical values and immoral, we could say, of behavior to denigrate society, to destroy the family structure, to destroy everything that keeps society operating in a logical order. And they create all these different civil rights leaders all throughout a generation They are people that have ideas that they carry to influence certain communities of who they are tied to. It doesn't matter if you have figures of any sort of genealogy background from society. If they're influencing certain people that they represent in certain communities, if they are bringing power to people so that they could rise up and that they could create a better world within their communities, you have what is the government and the people who are above the governments that are of the world that will assassinate anyone that is a figure of change to move people in the direction of, building to the most, we could say, gathering of then having powerful communities, of people being able to live their lives and raise their families, their children, in the way of individual teaching, individual thinking, and leading communities to God, to worship God, their creator, and to instill that which is of the Bible and the teachings, to grow them up in the right upbringing of morality and of truth. And also, we see the fact that they want to eradicate anything to do with what is of the Bible. They want to eradicate the belief that of people believing in God. They want to shun anything to do with, individual ideas, critical ideas, and anyone that speaks with intelligence. They want to shun. They want to make them look like they are a conspiracy theorist type of person, or they want to make a person that is speaking intelligent look as if they don't know what they're talking about, or they'll say something that you're not preaching, you're not speaking out of love, you're speaking out of harshness. They'll twist your words to make it look like you're a radical person, just for speaking common sense and speaking truth. And, we have to look at our own selves, and we have to start taking responsibility for our own selves so that we are not then being led astray like sheep. You know what I mean? And I'm talking about people, just doing what is for themselves, for what is the responsibility of oneself. That's how you start to break the cycle of the fold of being led to all of these world